economics. One of the things when David Patterson became governor of New York State, he looked at the resources, he looked at the contracts, looked at the investments, and how African Americans were being left out across the board. As mayor, how are you looking at that? Because when we talk about law firms, accounting firms, engineering firms, architecture firms, private equity firms. What we're seeing is New York City has the largest collection of black people of any city in America. New York City is one, Atlanta is two, Chicago is three. And what we continue to see are black folks who are driving pension funds, but getting screwed out of VC dollars. So let's talk about your plan there to make sure African Americans are getting a return on the investment, getting a piece of that economic pie.
Absolutely, Roland, and I think in many ways you're also speaking about the MWBE program, and
no, for me, I'm speaking about black people. I don't particularly like the MWBE because it's minority and women, and the women should really be white women because if you're a black woman, you're in a black category. So yes, the overall program is MWBE, but I'm speaking of black business. Go ahead.
And the reason I bring it up is that, as you've said, it is still far from successful as to what its original intent is, right? The intent of this is to ensure that we have contracts that match the same percentage and proportion as we have in our city and state's population. And right now, black women comprise less than 2% of the value of all contracts being issued by the city. That is unacceptable, frankly, because the city has an immense role in the question of generating wealth and ensuring that people can actually flourish in this city. And yet too often it's being used to double down on inequities that already exist, as opposed to ensure that equity is actually something that's being delivered across the 5 boroughs. And in looking at the different ways we can tackle this, one of the things is ensuring that there's actual enforcement of the provisions that we already have within the law, city agency to city agency. The second thing is actually going out to these businesses that have been approved to bid to ensure that they understand what a successful bid looks like. Because what I hear from a lot of these companies is that they will get rejected time and time again, and each time it doesn't feel like they're getting any closer to approval. And what we know is that the question of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not only something that Bill Ackman is attacking, it's also something that Donald Trump is attacking. I mean, the justification for the suspension of $18 billion in federal infrastructure grants just done is DEI. That's what they're saying. And it is part and parcel of an attack on black Americans across this country to try not only to rewrite the past, but also rewrite the present and the future. And it's not acceptable, and it won't be when I'm the mayor of the city.
Well, of course, they stripped $37 million from Atlanta airport for the very same reason, and that's what they're doing there. But before I go to my panel, I got 11 minutes left with you. I want to get them with questions. But on that point right there, there's a fantastic book on Maynard Jackson. Robert Holmes, and in that particular book, Maynard Jackson talked about, he said, listen, this airport ain't getting built. He said, tumbleweeds will roll down those runways before I allow this to be built without black participation. And one of the things that he did, and I tried to tell Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich when he was governor, before he decided to do his unethical stuff.
He got a little busy.
Well, when we talk about how do we help, one of the things that I see is that you have a lot of black firms. They want to compete for a contract, but they literally cannot survive floating their business for 6 months because typically cities are going to pay 180-day term. So one of the things Maynard Jackson did, he called the banks in that the city was putting their money in, and he said, they're getting contracts. They're getting a city contract. You're going to provide a line of credit to them, and the banks objected. He said, city treasurer, step in, pull our money out their banks. And this is very simple. If New York City is putting New York City's money in banks, and this is not even a race thing, you can say this for anybody who gets a city contract. I think the mayor should say, if you're the mayor, to the banks, hey, if this said business is getting a city contract and you know we're going to be paying them as a bank that's get the city's money, you're benefiting, you should be providing lines of credit to these businesses so they can be able to grow and prosper. And if the banks reject it, I think that's where you then say, fine, we're going to take our city money, taxpayer money, out of your banks since you cannot help New York City businesses. That's a way, man. Atlanta is what it is today because Maynard Jackson used the power of the political office. His grandfather taught him the 3 B's, the ballot, the book, and the buck. He used the power of the political office to drive the economic change in Atlanta.
That is fascinating. It's a story that I didn't know, and I think it's one that is worth following up on, because so much of what I've heard from so many small businesses is just the same problem that you brought up, which is how to stay afloat while they wait for that reimbursement. And there are certain size businesses that can handle that kind of weight, but there's so many that are just trying to start up that cannot. And it's the same thing for nonprofits. Right now, by last count, the city owes around $800 million in contracts that it's already awarded but has yet to pay up on. And that throws under, because they just can't afford to wait that long. And, I'm looking at every single step we can take that can actually make it easier to not only start but sustain a small business. I was speaking to a barbershop owner the other day who told me that to open a barbershop, he had to fill out 24 forms, go to 7 different agencies, and attend 12 different in-person events. How is that stimulating an entrepreneurial spirit here in New York City?
Questions from my panel. Matt Manning, civil rights attorney at Corpus Christi. Matt, your question for Zohran Mamdani.
Yes, Mr. Mamdani, good evening. Quick question for you. We talked on this show weeks ago about the essentially what would happen if you're elected mayor there in New York, which I anticipate you will be, and how that might reverberate out to the rest of the country. So my question to you is really twofold. One, when you get elected, what are your thoughts on what that will be representative for in terms of how New Yorkers are looking at the mayoral office, and maybe larger, how Americans are looking for different people to serve them? Number one. And number two, what responsibility, if any, do you anticipate you may feel when you're mayor for setting the standard there in New York, hoping that reverberates out to the rest